constitutes a good Souls-like. In theory, it shouldn't be that complicated. Hard bosses, finite healing items, dodge rolls, bonfire checkpoints, parry attack systems, those are the very few key components of a traditional Souls-like. So why are most game companies missing the mark on their own variations of the already finely tuned From Software formula? Well, it's not as complicated as you might think. The birth of the Souls-like genre was a long and treacherous process. Kingsfield was FromSoft's first title, which took inspiration from Skyrim. Kingsfield later inspired Demon's Souls, which is largely regarded by the community as the first true Soulsborne game. Oh, I suppose before I get too deep, I should actually break down the terms Soulsborne and Souls-like and how they're different from one another. Soulsborne games are any Souls-like games created by From Software, since they're the game company that invented the Souls genre. Think of it as games born from FromSoft, the father of Souls. Souls-like games are more general terminology. Any game from any developers that follows the Souls formula. For example, the Dark Souls series would be considered a Soulsborne Souls-like, while a game like Hollow Knight would be just a Souls-like. Does that make sense? Anyways, jumping back to the creation of the first Soulsborne, Demon's Souls. Demon's Souls essentially follows the same formula we've come to know from later titles. You're dropped into a strange, new, gloomy fantasy world tasked with annihilating horrific monster-like creatures. Upon defeating said creatures after dying, and dying, and dying, and probably dying another 30 times at the minimum, you are rewarded with unlocking the next section of the game, as well as a set amount of currency known as souls. Souls are then utilized to purchase items and character stat upgrades, such as higher health, a stronger character that can wear heavier armor, and so on. Even though Demon's Souls would come to pave the way for the incredibly popular game series Dark Souls, Demon's Souls' initial release wasn't received very well. Since then, there has been a remastered version that fine-tunes a lot of the initial issues players had with the game. But apart from that, when Demon's Souls was released, a lot of players failed to understand the appeal of a game that practically punished you for breathing. The From Software fanbase was incredibly scarce. You either understood the appeal of dying hundreds of times to some random wood platform beneath you breaking, plummeting your character into the abyss, losing all of your souls in progress in your last checkpoint, being taunted with the infamous "you died" menu, or you got too frustrated trying and went back to Mario. The concept of a game as punishing as Demon's Souls went over a lot of players' heads, and because of this, From Software had doubts in this new game genre they were pushing for. Even today, Demon's Souls is regarded as one of the inferior Soulsborne titles. So it would take a lot of convincing and pure willpower to convince higher-ups to pursue the seemingly failed Soulsborne genre. But one silly little masochist would step up and see his vision come to light. Hidetaka Miyazaki is regarded as the grandfather of the Souls-like genre. Having joined From Software in 2004, he worked closely on the Demon's Souls game. Despite that game not reaching the high success rates they were hoping for, with a lot of doubt surrounding the genre, Miyazaki believed in his vision. His vision of a game so punishing and yet so unbelievably addictive. Each death is a lesson to carry with you for not only the rest of that game, but for the rest of the Souls genre in its entirety. Miyazaki would not give up so easily. So after Demon's Souls, he pressed on and went to direct a teeny tiny little game no one has ever heard of, Dark Souls. Dark Souls took Demon's Souls' concept of get good to an extreme, not cutting back on the punishing gameplay seen in the previous title. In fact, Dark Souls celebrated and embraced the impossibly difficult that Demon's Souls had seen so much flack for. You're mad about that poison swamp that drains your health in Demon's Souls? Try trudging through an average New York apartment complex that we like to call Playtime in Dark Souls. How about swinging axes with electricity archers on the other side, punishing you for going too fast and too slow through the entirety of Sen's Fortress? How about goofy frogs that permanently halve your health upon death until purchasing an item costing 6,000 souls to remove it? You didn't like the difficulty of Demon's Souls? Then this game is definitely not for you. Either get good or cry about it. That's Dark Souls' mantra, and a mantra that, for whatever reason, Miyazaki believed in with all of his heart. To be honest though, my headcanon is that Miyazaki just wanted to create his ideal masochistic heaven solely for his own enjoyment. God, I love that little freak. Jokes aside, Dark Souls 1 upon release once again didn't do well. The game faced harsh critics and low sales. People widely didn't understand the appeal until something happened. After several post-launch patches, changes, the right audience began to find its way towards the genre. Although still niche, the game began to develop some notoriety, even achieving Golden Joystick's Ultimate Game of All Time award, nominated for BFTA's Best Strategy Game twice, and nominated for Satellite's Outstanding Role-Playing Game award. People were beginning to not only discover the genre, but also enjoy the games themselves, understanding the draw of the gameplay components that so many others had critiqued. Due to Dark Souls 1's success, Miyazaki was able to cultivate a now beloved cult classic series that would go on to inspire FromSoft's future titles, as well as other game development studios. So even though today we've come to cherish these games and adore the grueling gameplay that derives from the Souls genre, this wasn't always the case, forcing FromSoftware and Miyazaki to fight for their ideas. But let's take a moment to really break down the gameplay so we can better understand the question of the day: what actually makes a good Souls-like? I think the best way to describe the genre of Souls-like is to take you through the gameplay of Dark Souls 1, since it ticks all of our boxes and inspired most future titles. As mentioned before, after a short, mostly vague cutscene depicting a corrupted fantasy world, you arrive as a blank slate character. Choose your starting class, name, a special gift such as a talisman or more health, and okay, bye, have fun at school, I'll see you when I see you! You're provided with no context as to who you are, where you came from, or your goal. Instead, you're expected to use context clues as to where to go next. Well, in Dark Souls 1, you're stuck in a jail cell, so I should probably try to escape. Okay, now there's a giant monster, and all I have to my name is a broken sword that does 1 damage. Maybe I should return later and find some more tools. Here's another human. Maybe I should talk to him. Oh, he gives me the ability to heal. Oh, and here's a better weapon. I can now assume that I have all the components to try to take down this first monster I've encountered. Although when playing, it may seem more of a combat-centralized game, Soulslikes actually force the player to do a lot of internal problem solving, should they choose to do so. Well, I do 1 damage to this asylum demon with my broken sword. I could either come back later, assuming I find other things to make this fight easier, or brute force and punch this thing 600 times until it dies. One of these choices is significantly less practical than the other, but what's important to note here is even though Dark Souls is mostly a linear game as opposed to Elden Ring, you are still presented with infinite ways to approach a fight. Even upon leaving and returning at a later time, how will you choose to fight this enemy? Will it be ranged attacks? Will you be more aggressive in attempts to try to stagger? Will you focus on stamina consumption, incorporating strafing or dodging tactics to stay closer to the enemy or back off once hitting? Even though you are eventually forced to fight this creature to unlock later parts of the game and progress, you are still granted with options on how you personally choose to do so, or when you can always retreat, grind more smaller enemies, and level yourself. Speaking of leveling, whenever you kill an enemy, you are rewarded with souls, your currency. Souls can later be transferred to level up your own character's different attributes. But here's where the next line of strategy comes into play. You cannot level infinitely, and the more you level, the higher the next level costs, scaling exponentially. This leaves the player with a difficult decision each level opportunity of what skill set they need to prioritize. I need higher health since I keep getting killed by bosses in 2 hits, but there's also this weapon I want to wield, but am too weak to do so and need higher strength points. This system punishes players for trying to have a well-rounded or quality build. It's best to focus on only a few character stats that matter to you in your own gameplay. For instance, I like being aggressive, so I benefit from having more stamina so I can dodge roll attacks and stay closer in battle. But again, this isn't explained to the character, and how they level their character is a decision solely up to them. So you level your character after killing this first boss and notice a little campsite. This is called a bonfire in the Souls-like genre and acts as your checkpoint and personal mini hub. Here you can level up, eventually fast travel, strengthen the bonfire's healing power, and so on. However, there is a cost for utilizing the bonfire. Sitting down will update where you spawn to that bonfire, saving your progress as well as replenishing your health and used healing items. However, will respawn all previously killed enemies except main bosses. So should you choose to retreat to your bonfire to heal yourself, you'll need to re-fight all of the enemies that you had already killed once again. This creates another internal dilemma of whether or not to retreat and essentially lose your progress, or press on and pray you're able to make it to the next bonfire in time before you're faced with death once more. Luckily, death is more of an inconvenience in these games rather than a huge punishment. All you lose is freezes your level progress, sending you back to your previous bonfire checkpoint and all of your souls. You of course do have the opportunity to attempt to pick back up your dropped souls where you had died previously. However, should you die again before getting your souls, they are now unrecoverable and lost forever. Other than that, dying is more of a lesson. Say you died to an enemy that jumped you from around the other corner. Well, now you know next time you're near that corner to brace for that enemy and be better prepared. Luckily, especially in later games, navigating to the next bonfire only takes about a maximum of 5 minutes if you know exactly where you're going and what threats are around the corner. Because of this, as mentioned prior, these deaths are more of an inconvenience. Albeit, they grow to become a bit annoying should you consistently die, but you're always able to retreat, level up more, level your weapon higher to deal more damage, and come back when better equipped. Or you could just be like me and brute force the same thing over and over and over again for 6 hours since that boss looked at you funny and now you have a personal vendetta against it and you want it dead now. What? Just me? And yeah, that's basically it. Forge your own path, level up, utilize bonfires, and dodge roll, back up, focus on stamina, and strafe to avoid enemy attacks, and navigate through until the end, discovering small elements of lore through item descriptions or sparse boss cutscenes. The components of a Soulslike really aren't all that difficult. Expanding on these ideas, what makes a good Soulslike then? Here's where those ideas and components begin to expand to fortify the Souls genre. Sure, you can ensure you have your baseline ingredients, the hard boss fights, the bonfires, the dodge rolls, etc. But if those ingredients are subpar with unequal balancing, you're going to have a bad to mediocre soup at best. One of the most noticeable elements right from the get-go of beginning a new Soulslike is how character movement and animations feel. It's interesting to analyze this since even though Elden Ring is far superior comfortability and movement than previous FromSoft titles, when playing Dark Souls 1, movement still doesn't seem as abysmally awful as it does when playing other non-FromSoft Soulslikes. It's important to mimic the speed and capabilities of enemies and bosses. If you have an exceptionally fast boss, your character's speeds should be matched in a way to ensure this encounter feels possible and engaging. Slow, heavy, clunky player movement is an immediate turnoff when it comes to Soulslikes. Take Lords of the Fallen, for example, a non-FromSoftware Soulslike that is often regarded as one of the worst Soulslikes of all time. One of the most notable reasons for these strikingly bad reviews is due to the awkward camera, player movement, and strange transition between weapon and character animations feeling unnatural. And these are all things that can be critiqued within minutes of first launching the game, souring any future impressions throughout one's playthrough. If you haven't considered the impact of movement in Souls games, it's likely you've only played, quote, good Souls-likes. When you notice it when playing an inferior title, you'll definitely never not notice comfortable movement. Another key component is ensuring the game has good world building. You really have to fall in love with the world surrounding you since it's likely you'll be stuck within certain areas for extraordinary amounts of time. For instance, I would much rather be stuck within the gorgeous scenery of Dark Souls 3's Ethereal than Dark Souls 1's The Depths. Ethereal and its following dungeon levels are incredibly difficult when it comes to navigating an enemy types. The end-of-level boss, Pontiff, rivals boss fights from Elden Ring's DLC, Shadow of the Erd Tree in difficulty, and most enemies approach in large groups, able to snipe you from across the map by utilizing magic, able to sometimes wipe your health in 1 to 2 swift blows. However, there is so much deep-rooted lore etched within this area, engulfed by a gorgeous scenic view, that these annoyances feel less annoying. I died again. Oh well, I guess I have to go and admire the bustling castle and masterpiece-like backgrounds with frighteningly gorgeous enemies around every corner again. Oh well, I'd much rather die 100 times in a rich environment like that than opposed to the dark, sewer-like level design of The Depths. I beg of you to find me a single person that enjoys literally any aspect of The Depths. Good luck with that one, buddy. You absolutely need to have valid reasons to want to explore the levels in these games, because you're going to be dying and re-exploring these areas a lot more than you may think. Not to mention, when I think of bad Souls-likes that I've played, normally they relish in repetitive enemy level design. I really don't want to be fighting the exact same humanoid enemy over and over and over again. I'm already dying and refighting enough. I really would rather not add on to that repetitive nature. Interconnectivity is also a bonus. If I can experience the same feeling of the elevator back back down to Firelink Shrine in Dark Souls 1 again, you get an A+ in my book for level design. Finding out one area is connected to another in a fascinating spiderweb-like arrangement of interconnectivity is grade A level design. Next up is finding the difficult balance between having a challenging game but not annoying, which is probably one of the hardest things to judge since difficulty is a subjective idea. Take the whole Elden Ring DLC debate on whether or not it's too hard. I actually have another video on this here if you'd like to check it out, but in essence, initially some players found the DLC to be scaled too much from the base game, resulting in the DLC receiving a pretty negative review bombing. However, another huge chunk of players, including myself, found the experience to not be overly scaled at all, finding the difficulty to be perfectly balanced between new, engaging, difficult, and fun. But those experiences are all subjective. It can be pretty difficult for developers to conceptualize the difference between so hard it's addictive or so hard it's ultra for and refund. For instance, I love the non-FromSoftware Souls-like Lies of P. However, there are instances where I feel the game treads into the artificial difficulty waters a bit too much, hindering my enjoyment of the game a tad bit. But I've seen plenty of others who don't mind the hardness and even enjoy it more than, say, Sekiro, another parrying gameplay style Souls-like from FromSoftware. Traditionally, though, FromSoftware gets this formula right, which is to be expected since they kinda created the Souls-like genre from the ground up. These games scale excellently, naturally progressing the player, starting with harder areas, developing into even harder areas to harder and hardest, never feeling like there's a massive jump in required skill level. Following difficulty, there really should be different accessibility mechanics to make your time a bit easier should you choose to counteract these hard gameplay design choices. This way, developers have less stress of accidentally making a game too inaccessible for players. Instead, allow for them to use new tools to their advantage. For instance, Dark Souls and Elden Ring have summons to help with bosses, Sekiro has unseen aid, automatically applied when you die a certain amount of times, eliminating loss of money upon death, so on and so forth. I personally feel it best to have the option to allow additional aid for myself should I be struggling on something for far too long. I believe it also allows for new fans of the genre to transition themselves into the gameplay mechanics of Soulslikes a bit easier, expecting a bit less from them, especially since they're just now developing the needed skills to not die every 20 seconds. Awareness comes with time. After having hundreds upon hundreds of hours in Souls games, obviously if I see a strange chest in the middle of nowhere, I'm going to proceed with caution, assuming it's likely a mimic chest ready to immediately kill me. But as a brand new player, of course they'll see a chest and only experience excitement, awaiting a brand new shiny item upon opening. It's okay to allow these newer players some wiggle room and less punishing consequences should they choose to utilize these accessibility tools. Finally, another key component that falls in line with accessibility is the importance of having variety. Soulslikes have such replayability primarily due to the variety of builds, items, weapons, stat allocation, and mostly non-linear gameplay. My first gameplay could be a beefy strength build that fat rolls and takes a minute to swing my weapon every time but does massive damage, while my next playthrough could be with a wooden ladle or with ranged magic, focusing less on aggressive encounters with the bosses and more on magic power consumption. Options are endless, and it's why you see such a huge Souls-like community here on YouTube. Creators are literally making a living off of simply playing the games in different, unique ways. Of course, viewers would be intrigued by videos of people beating a very difficult game simply by smacking it with a spoon. It's satisfying to both play and watch. Games like Elden Ring will forever stand the test of time and be regarded as timeless masterpieces because of these satisfying and addictive gameplay loops. Yes, it's hard, but it's similar to riding a bike. Once you learn, you've learned. But there's absolutely always room for improvement. Upon beating the game, if it's a good Souls-like, you're often faced with the immediate thought of, I wonder how much better I'd be with the starting bosses and areas if I were to replay the game, having all the knowledge I have now. Better yet, I wonder how different the game would play if I completely switched up my build. This is absolutely what keeps players returning and wanting more, and is likely the most important aspect of any Souls game. I think it's likely important to briefly touch base on some Souls-likes that I think are bad. Lords of the Fallen is often regarded as the worst Souls-like. Going down the list, it's clunky with awkward movement, buggy, repetitive, and too unfairly difficult. Code Vein is unique in that it has one of the best character customization tools, but other than that, it sucks. It's bad. Imagine Blighttown. Okay, now imagine that is every single area in the game. Repetitive, unfair, unfun, not innovative, and you couldn't pay me to replay certain aspects such as the cathedral. Holy hell, frick the cathedral. Honorable mention time, Neo 1 is a very popular Souls game that I have a personal vendetta against because the game literally would not work for me. The audio was broken, and no matter what I tried, it would crash after the initial cutscene. I genuinely never even got to move. Oh cool, the game is gone. Uh-huh, I see. Yeah, I see. Right. No, this is good. This is good. This is... I've heard great things. Too bad I'll never get to play. Bound by Flame is labeled as a Souls-like on Steam and basically has the elements, but god is it clunky, slow-paced, so punishing it's unfun, and easily one of my least favorite games. Yeah. It's bad. I don't want to spend too much time dwelling on these games, but in their short synopses, you can likely find a pattern. Repetitive, not engaging worlds, and gameplay that is so unfun it lacks replayability. Death is more punishing since it means you are one step further from beating the game and uninstalling forever. But fret not, for here is a quick shout out to some actually good non-FromSoftware Souls-like games that innovate the genre and give me hope. Developers, if you are wanting to make your own Souls-like, please, 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 please reference FromSoftware, of course, but also reference these games and the ways that they took the FromSoftware formula and made it their own. If you're looking for essentially Bloodborne meets Sekiro, Lies of P is pretty in line with FromSoftware. Despite some flaws and sharp difficulty spikings, it stays true to the genre. You could probably easily convince a new Souls player that this game was in fact made by FromSoftware. That's how good it is. Hollow Knight is a non-traditional Souls in the sense that it's 2D as opposed to most being 3D environments. Still non-linear, still maintaining the components like your bonfires, healing, dodging, hard boss fights, and dropping souls upon death, but also allowing the game to have its own identity, drawing inspiration from Metroidvanias. Blasphemous is another 2D side-scrolling Souls-like, but instead of having Hollow Knight's hand-drawn art style, it's pixel. Incredible lore, world building, and level design that will remind you of Dark Souls 1 in its ability to somehow be interconnected. Finally, my magnum opus of Souls games, another Crab's Treasure. Now, I know what you're thinking from the outside. There's no way a game that looks like it came straight out of a SpongeBob episode with references to Among Us actually passes the Souls-like test. I could rave about this game for hours, and actually, you know what? I will. Another time. Just note that I adore this game for its ability to subvert expectations of what a Souls-like has to look like. It's bright, fun, has its own unique identity, tells a surprisingly emotional story of self-worth, can be very difficult but with a satisfying gameplay loop, has a really unique gameplay mechanic of different shield-like shells that have different impacts on your gameplay style, has a boss soundtrack that sounds like this. I mean, hello? Oh well, I just died. Guess I have to re-listen to this absolute bop. Holy hell, who cooked here? Anyways, if you couldn't tell, I love this game a lot. The first and only game I've ever platinumed. It's so good, please God. Play this game if you haven't. I would die for Krill. I'm going to stop yapping about this game and save it for another time, because clearly I could be here forever talking about it. I just think it perfectly orchestrates how game devs should take the Souls genre and improve upon it to create a game with their own identity. I'd like to address my final point being that you don't need to copy word for word the gameplay experience of masterpiece Souls-likes like Elden Ring to be considered a Souls-like. I believe that in order for this genre to naturally develop and get better, we need to see more developed ideas taking into consideration the key components of what makes these games Souls-likes in the first place. FromSoftware created the genre and classifies Sekiro as a Souls-like, even though it lacks a lot of the basic traditional elements such as stat leveling and dodge rolls, adapting skill trees, and pairing instead. It is okay for developers to experiment and be innovative with these ideas. We need more Blasphemouses and Neos and Hollow Knights and another Crab's Treasures. Games that aren't purebred Souls-likes in the sense that they are brave enough to expand and create new ideas while still following the basics. Developers get it wrong when they're too scared and find themselves trying to copy Dark Souls. You cannot copy Dark Souls, especially if you strip it of all of its unique charm and personality. This only creates a game that's a shell of its actual potential. So try new things, new gameplay mechanics. You don't need to plop your character into a dark fantasy world and force players to dodge to avoid all attacks in order to make an engaging Souls-like. But that's just what I think. Let me know if you have any good examples of non-FromSoftware Souls-likes in the comments down below. With that said, I stream Souls-likes here on YouTube Wednesdays through Sundays, so come check me out. Otsu Eve.